Welcome back. So, Itimat,
Thank you.
what's the reason you chose to put your life behind this idea of doing flow engineering? There's so many things that could have happened in Gen AI.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a great one. It's too good. But first, I want to thanks a lot for having me here. It's a pleasure. And the question is very meaningful to me. I would say that for me, like when I'm thinking ahead, like 5 years from now, I can imagine a world where a technical product manager can actually request a code generation tool to complete a full feature end to end. And then there would be a tool like ours, a product, a platform like ours, Codium AI, that will actually verify the correctness that everything that that technical product manager wrote in the specification is actually being completed and nothing else was broken. By the way, I don't think this is possible right now with the current technology and tools. I don't believe. I know there's a lot of initiatives, a lot of coding agents. By the way, we also have a coding agent. It's a bit more grounded. It's not as like buzzy and like trying to, conquer the world. We're trying to make it practical, but there are some others that claim that they can do tasks end to end. I don't think it's possible right now or available right now, but I think it will in 5 years. Okay, so why is this related to your question? It's because like once it's possible for a technical product manager to complete a feature end to end, then I think there are other aspects culture wise that we need to consider here. Let me be practical with an example. Let's say that like let's say a technical product manager in Meta and Facebook want to develop some feature in the feed. Please personalize this and that part of the images and do some other things. I want to have 2% convergence, higher convergence on that aspect, and I'm willing to sacrifice half a point convergence in other aspects. Go. And now the AI, the code generation part could like, you know, actually create this feature in many ways. Even if the if you know if the specification was relatively detailed, there's still underneath the implementation could be many ways to do that. The code could be hundreds of lines, 1,000 of lines, who know, maybe more. Nobody would review it. Is that aligned with the company culture? Like you want to do no harm, make sure that you are not biased towards a certain direction, that you're not hurting some aspects. That no, developers are trained as part of their onboarding and part of their activities in the companies, not only about how to write the code, the best practices, and make it happen, but also how to implement stuff according to the company culture. And I think when you get to a point where a technical product manager can really write software, but didn't actually generate it, it's going to be a critical. And Coding AI, what we do is we focus more on the code review and the code testing part. Yes, we also do code generation. We enable code Q&A, but we're more focused on the testing, on the reviewing part. We call it integrity intentionally. That we call this entire like options together. We call it integrity. And the idea is that eventually that our system will not only be able to tell you, does it work functionally? Does it according to your best practices? It's like like high quality, but also, hey, this implementation fits the company culture and this one does not because ABC. And in order to do that, you can't just call an LLM. It won't be enough. You need to deploy a full flow that will have a pragmatic way to run over the code, the behavior of the code, and try to extract the behaviors and eventually compare it to natural language description of the company's best practices and also cultural aspect. So that's like why first we start Coding AI and why also we're dealing with flow engineering, because we're really careful about not doing simple stuff of, hey, this is a piece of code that we advise you to check if you want or not, but rather this is a lot of parts of code, and are they working as expected according to your spec, didn't break anything, but also according to your expectation of code, of best practices and culture wise, etc. So yeah, it's a long question because you ask a good like fundamental
No, I
question
think
about the
that's
history. Yeah.
the word culture itself is a universe by itself. Essentially, you're trying to avoid a like the racial hash dispenser or Mother Teresa taking a stick and feeding poor children. Germany
Yeah.
shot themselves in the foot with something like that. But this is easier said than done because cultural has organizational best practice. As a culture, my hereditary, like you take a 100-year-old company, they have certain ethos, certain ethics. Then there is demographics of geography, race, language. Then there is things like political sensitivities. All
Yep.
these things have to come inside, and that's 5 decades of work that you can do for your company. Like each facet is a decade of work. You could specialize on that. A
Yeah.
huge team doing it. That's
Yeah.
absolutely.
So to put it to say we're trying to do it bottom up. The first like culture role, we're trying to do it bottom up because we want to be pragmatic. The first cultural aspect is engineering best practices, right? Engineering best
Okay.
practices culture. This is feasible. By the way, it's not easy. You still need a flow engineering. You can't just like take the code, take the some document and say, hey, does this fit best practice, and expect the LLM to spit an answer. You need to do it properly with a well engineered flow with matching and things like that. So that's like it's not a low hanging fruit, but the lowest hanging fruit, and also a big problem with enterprise. Then the next thing after that is like the organization culture, and that's also feasible, also like something that we can do. And these two together, I agree with you, there's a decade of work, maybe 5 years, not a decade, but it could be even a decade. And only then we grow into, like you mentioned, things more on the culture of people, higher level than organization. For us,
Okay.
we will save that for the day of the ASI, the artificial super intelligent. We will be ready for that. We will have the technology for like helping AI to adhere to the organization best practice. If we will be ready with that technology, so when we'll have a super intelligence, maybe we could also force that thing to also to adhere to people, to a country, or best practices. You're right. So that's our next decade after the current one.
Yeah, but I think you're on a great path. I mean, it has
Yeah.
so many things going on, and things keep evolving. It's not a static thing that we are talking about.
Right.
So now I would get to the question, actually, the core. Typically, the flow engineering, from what I understood, comes from a lot of anti patterns that exist because of poor developer thinking or the practices that we have. Can you share a couple of anti patterns that exist in architecture or code, which kind of stands out as an example? Flow engineering is kind of geared to handle this anti pattern.
Yeah. I agree with you, but with your permission, I'll start with the one minus. I'll start with the
Okay.
good patterns, but then I'll go to
Okay.
anti-pattern.
Okay.
So
Okay.
just to give context for some of our listeners, at Codium AI, we developed an open source tool that is called Alpha Codium. We released a paper, an open source, a blog, and what we did with Alpha Codium is compete against professional developers on a public known code competition called Code Forces. Actually, to be
Okay.
frank, we competed on a benchmark that was extracted from it called Code Contests. This benchmark was made by Google, by DeepMind. They're the best in the world in competing on like whatever kind of competitions, like Go, like chess, etc. Even better than OpenAI until today. And DeepMind were the first to introduce this benchmark derived from the Codeforce public code competition.
Okay.
Then OpenAI also competed on it. Salesforce also competed in it, and we did better than all the three. And the reason is because we have a different paradigm, like different thinking. All of the competitors, they were doing like system one thinking. I'm referencing Daniel Kahneman. They were like using LLMs very straightforward. Like, here's a problem. Now give me the answer now. Like, think about it. If I ask you as a developer, here's a problem, give me now the answer. That will also you will I will force you to give an intuition. Like, you use your intuition, give me immediately like a piece of code.
So
And
it's like, if I understood your thing, it says I want fast retrieval. Okay, I'm going to add 5 indexes to the database. Done.
right. and probably you will give like a reasonable answer if you have like one second, but if you want to do a proper, you'll do a process of thinking to get that. But DeepMind and OpenAI and Salesforce, they didn't do that. What they did is system one thinking. They just took the problem, called the LLM, give me an answer. Now it didn't work. So what DeepMind did is call it 10,000 times, every time with a different prompt. Oh my God. What we did instead is what we call system two thinking, or more accurately, Daniel Kahan did it, which means that we do a full process. We don't just ask for a full process like a human would do. Like, let's think about it step by step, but in a bit more rigorous way, like you would do if you got a problem. So before the anti-patterns, let's think about the good patterns. If I give you a problem, hey, try to solve it. First, you would read the problem and try to reflect. What is the meaning here? What should I achieve here? The second thing, if you are almost a TDD dude, you would say, okay, how would I test it? How would I verify that my code actually works? Okay, now that I understood the problem and I have a way to test it, now let's think about, and when I'm saying you, I'm saying as a developer, and also how we designed the flow. That's what we call it, flow engineering. We engineer the flow that could try to repeat according to a human developer. Okay, so first we try to understand the problem, understand how to test it. Let's think about different solution. Now let's reflect on them, pros and cons. Okay, now let's choose a solution. Let's try to create a pseudocode. Let's try to reflect on it. Let's try to write the code. Let's
Oh,
try to run a few tests. Does it pass? Do they not? Okay, let's add more tests, or let's fix the code. And that's the process that we call flow engineering. So basically looking for the positive side for before the anti-patterns, then like basically what we try to change the paradigm is, let's not use LLM and expect them to be geniuses and answer with a click of a button with one inference these challenging problem. Let's let them as human think about it. Now about anti-patterns, yes, we try to like unlock anti-patterns, for example, with doing thinking like ahead of time, what would be the tests that will make the code
uh,
work. And this helps the LLM to start with generate a better solution and generate a more plausible solution, because it already includes the test that it should pass. Just an example. Another like yeah, so planning and another thing is like breaking down large pieces of code to methods. It's also like an anti-pattern of like, if you have like sorry, Uncle Bob, like clean code.
yeah.
We try to have alpha codium. Our flow is designed to try to break
Ah,
functionalities into
okay.
little pieces of methods that can be tested separately. And that's another thing that it's embedded in the flow. So like you mentioned, yes, we build a flow that includes like the best practices and try to like fight anti-patterns, and that this is how it manages to create high quality code.
I think you covered the second question also. And I loved your phrase of don't blame the LLM, which I think I mean, it's